My name is Marcelo Pineyro. I'm a technical solutions architect with Soliant Consulting. I've been doing FileMaker development for over 20 years, and I have a lot to cover with you today, so we'll dive right in. I'm going to start by showing you the app that we built for a client of ours. We'll look at how authentication or authorization works in that app. We'll look, of course, at the studio pages that we built, and I'll make a point of sharing a number of lessons learned with you. We'll consider some of the benefits and limitations of Studio. Then we'll explore the options that we have for pushing data from Studio to FileMaker and vice versa, and we'll see how we did that in this application. We'll look at how we implemented error trapping and handling, and then hopefully have time to share with you some thoughts, some considerations for when we're at the planning stages of an application like this that combines Studio Connect and FileMaker. You might recognize this diagram from the keynote today. I'm bringing it up here for a couple of reasons. One is to give you a sense of the level of complexity of the applications that we're starting to build using a combination of Studio and FileMaker. The other one is because I want to tell you a little bit about the use case that we're talking about here, so during the demo that makes more sense to you. The application in question we built for the University of Illinois, Chicago, for their School of Dentistry, specifically for the CE department, the Continuing Education Department, and is built for faculty members. I'll draw your attention to the studio tables, the activity one there. Faculty members will create a proposal for an activity, okay? And an activity can have learning objectives, things you'll learn if you participate as a student in that activity. So those are children of the activity. Then for an activity, the faculty can associate one or more faculty members to play the role of instructors for that activity, okay? And then finally, so that's a joint table, of course, between faculty and activity. And then there is approval. So those faculty members that are members of a committee, the approvals committee, will also sort of, if you will, submit a vote. They will approve or reject the activities, and that's captured in the approval joint table. That's all I'll say about the ERD. We'll come back to it at the end of the presentation. So let me actually show you what we have built. Just takes a moment to go from mirror to extended display. Before I dive into the application itself, I want to show you, I guess we got a taste of this at the keynote, or if you attended the previous session by Louis and Bridget. This is what Studio looks like if you haven't seen it yet. There is a user management section where we can create local user accounts, we can create groups, but now we're able to configure an external identity provider.
Is that live? Like, is that actually, we can do that now, or is that coming?
That is available in ETS. It's not available widely. Yeah. This is a list of supported IDPs, and Claris has, I guess, will make widely available documentation for, it's step-by-step documentation with screenshots on how you set up what some IDP vendors call a registered app. So that's what you have to do on the IDP side. And then once you have created that, you can come in here and enter the information for that registered app. And that's about it. It's the same app that one would create if you want to do external authentication in FileMaker, if you have done that already. I'll point your attention to the fact that we can choose when, for externally authenticated users, when they log into Studio, we can automatically associate them with one or more groups that we have defined in Studio. And so here I'm linking those users to the faculty group. That will be relevant in a minute. So then I can take that this URL that I can copy here, and then in the case of UIC, when I use that URL, this is what I see. So it automatically redirects me to sign in with my UIC Microsoft Entra account, which is great. It's very convenient because then we don't have to manage those accounts in Studio. In terms of authorization, I think, I forget if it was Rob or who, but maybe Louis mentioned access privileges. We know that Claris is working on an access privilege level that is closer to what we have in FileMaker, but what we have available today is what you see here. We can assign one of two roles to a user account: manager, in which case you have access to everything Studio, or member. And so when I log in as a faculty member, what I see is this. It's just this hub with these two views. The reason is that if I switch over to the hub section, and I think of hubs as a collection of views, and views are the web pages that we build in Studio, yeah, right? So in addition to holding views, we can specify at the hub level which users or groups have access to that hub. And because I've given this hub access to the faculty group, that's why when UIC faculty log into the Studio account, what they see are these two views. So I'm going to jump now to a demo of the application. And it starts with the user selecting the faculty home view. So let me switch over here. So when I first log in as a faculty member, I don't see any records there. This is the FileMaker application. It's the detail view for activities. And note there are 439 records currently. So they start by creating a new proposal. This is an activity proposal. And they only see the ones that they have created, right? So there are many activity records in Studio now. They only see the ones they created. And I wanted to show you here that the moment that was created, the record was pushed to FileMaker with a status of draft, and that's the title of the activity that we created. So the CE coordinator can see right away if anyone has started a draft proposal. So if we select the proposal, this is a form they have to complete. And mind you, I'm going to stop this for a moment. In the keynote, we saw the use of form views. So if you were in the previous session by Louis and Bridget, this is using the custom view. So just wanted to make that explicit. I'm just filling out just a few of the objects for demonstration purposes. And what you're seeing here, this is called a spreadsheet object in Studio, kind of like a portal in FileMaker, but it launches a picker. I didn't have to code this. This is something we get for free in Studio by adding it to a view. And what we're doing here is we're using it as a picker so we can link, we can search and select faculty members that we're going to associate with this activity. It's effectively creating records in a join table. So then here I'm just going to scroll through. At this point in time, I could log out, and all of the information was saved automatically. There isn't an explicit commit. As a user enters data, it's saved automatically to the Studio tables. Watch what happens when I press the submit button there. The submit button goes away, we get that confirmation message, and now all of the fields became read-only because we changed the status of the activity to proposed. So at that point, the faculty can no longer edit that activity in Studio. And as you can see here, all of that information was pushed to FileMaker, including the activity faculty join records. Now at this point, let's imagine there was insufficient information in the proposal. So the CE coordinator can change the status of the proposal in FileMaker, and that's pushed back to Studio. So the status of the activity is updated in Studio again now. And by changing it back to draft, now the faculty member is able to edit that proposal again, fill in whatever information was missing, and send it back. So I'm going to just fill out this field for demonstration purposes that then we can push back this information to FileMaker. And in a moment, I'm going to show you another configuration of that spreadsheet object that I mentioned before, this one here. This is another way of creating related records in a direct way without, launching a picker. So here we're creating learning objectives.
You do text like what Louis was talking about with adding the images. Is that possible to add different data types to a spreadsheet item that you can add? For example, like they did their portfolio pictures. Could you add container data to a table?
The question was, can we add different data types to one of the spreadsheet objects? I have not tried it with something like an attachment. So I don't know the answer to that. I would have to test that.
Quick question. I noticed you disabled all the fields on the web side when the status changed to proposed, and then the FileMaker side could change it back if they want to request a modification or something. That to avoid like record conflicts from people on both ends editing.
Exactly.
And if there are conflicts, like if you allow the system to have conflicts, how are those resolved? Or implementation of sync, or are they, or do we know?
So the question was, how do I avoid conflicts with people editing records in Studio, in FileMaker? Is that why we changed the fields to read-only in the form when we changed the status? I will answer your question, but let me get back to it later. It's actually something I plan to address specifically at the end.
Okay.
Thank you. So here we're going to resubmit. We resubmitted the form, we're just going to see that the data was pushed from Studio to FileMaker. Now, the workflow for UIC is such that once the CE coordinator is done with this proposal, they change the status to under review. And now the members of the approvals committee need to review and approve or reject that activity. When I first log in, so here I am now logged in as if I was a member of that approvals committee. Currently, we don't see any activities, but because we updated the status of that one activity to under review, we push that status to Studio, and this spreadsheet object here shows us activities with an under review status. This is all of the information from the activity proposal form, but in read-only form, because members of the committee don't need to change anything. They need to review it, and like you're seeing here, either approve or reject the proposal. So this is effectively creating a record in that approvals join table that I referenced in the ERD before. And then that is pushed over to FileMaker, and we can see the comment that we added.
Are joins managed completely in that way by putting a spreadsheet item on a form? Is that kind of how a join is created?
This is something that I wanted to include in my presentation, and I'm afraid it's a bit of it might take a while to do justice to how related data works now. that is, the question was how joins are captured if it's by putting a spreadsheet object on a layout. Let's defer that question. If there is time at the end, I'd be more than happy to address it. But let me get through the material that I have. Do remind me, do ask that question at the end again if I forget, please. So let me go back to center mode. I'll point out a couple of, or some limitations that I found in Studio. One is, or maybe this is not a limitation, but a consideration. Studio, like FileMaker, has internal record IDs. Those are not persistent, right? So like in FileMaker, maybe this hits home more. If we use the data migration tool and we move data from one file to a clone, all of the FileMaker internal record IDs are going to be new, right? That's why we don't use those as primary keys. In Studio currently, we cannot define a field as a UUID or as a serial number, not in the field definition section. We can have UUIDs in Studio, but currently through a Connect flow, and I'll show you how I'm doing that later. The related data, the quote-unquote relationships in Studio are based on the internal record ID, so it can be appealing to use those, like to push those to FileMaker. I would advise you against doing that. I would suggest that you use UUIDs for everything. And that's what I'm doing in Studio and in FileMaker.
So did you say the UUIDs in Studio are persistent or not?
The UUIDs that I'm setting in Studio via a Connect flow are persistent.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
If you're going to work with Studio, I suggest you have a clear naming convention from the get-go. Why? Because a number of reasons. And you'll have to decide what you name the fields, right? In the views, for most objects, for the fields, you can choose to either display the name of the field as the label or your own custom label. But there are some situations, like in the spreadsheet objects, where we don't have control over the label. So the user is going to see the name of the field. So I found myself naming fields in a very user-friendly manner, which is not something I typically do in FileMaker. So that's one consideration. If you then change the name of a field, and you're referencing that field in a Connect flow, it's going to break the flow. And another thing to be aware of is we can change field types in Studio currently like we can in FileMaker. So if you decided you want to make like a number field text or vice versa or whatever, you'll have to delete the field, create a new one, but then you'll have to update your Connect flows and your views where you have that field. The other thing that I want to call out is that currently, and I know Claris is working on this, we don't have a way of creating a copy, if you will, of a Studio account so that we can have multiple environments, like a development environment and production environment. And there is no automated way of applying patches from one to the other. So if we did end up with different environments and we make changes in a, say, development environment, we'll have to manually replicate them in production. On the flip side, let's talk about some of the benefits of Studio that I haven't already covered. For non-front-end developers like me, it can be a lot easier and faster to create a native web application using Studio. There are different views that we can choose from, kind of like templates, like calendar and Kanban boards, etc. And then we have objects that we can just drag onto a view, like the spreadsheet object that we talked about, that have a lot of built-in functionality already. Studio is responsive, so the pages that we saw, if we were to look at them in a tablet, Studio resizes, rearranges elements for us, which is great, which is something that most of us expect in web applications now. Studio runs on AWS infrastructure, so it's very scalable, and we can expect it to be highly available. And finally, like Wim alluded to in the keynote, by using Studio, we're not introducing a dependency on either a vendor or another technology. Okay, so here's where we are in the presentation. I've covered the things that were like specific to Studio per se. I'd like to now talk about how we can push data from Studio to FileMaker. We have a couple of options. One is to use an external data source in FileMaker that references the tables in Studio. With shadow tables, performance could be an issue, but the main thing for me in terms of deciding whether to use an external data source or not is that we're now limited to what we could call a polling approach. So if I want to know from the context of FileMaker, has something changed in Studio or not, I have to constantly look and query that. The alternative to that is to use kind of Connect Flow, which is another option, and that allows us to adopt an event-driven approach. There are many events, many triggers in Connect that we can use so that when a record is created, edited, deleted in Studio, we can fire a flow that will push or do whatever it needs to do with that data immediately. We learned at the keynote today that eventually there will be another option, which is that easy FileMaker representation, that bi-directional sync of data that will happen behind the scenes. That is great. I will say that will not be a replacement for using something like Connect, because we won't always want our tables in Studio and in FileMaker to be mirrors of each other. We may want the schema and or the data to be a little different. So it's the Connect flow, the Connect approach is what I've used in this application, and I would like to demo that for you now. Or I guess more than demo is we'll look at how that works. Okay, so from the sidebar in Studio, I'm going to click this link to open Connect. If you're not too familiar with Connect, Connect has projects. And I think of projects kind of like hubs in Studio. They're containers. Well, they do more than this, but projects are like a container for flows. And flows are like scripts in FileMaker. Let me actually show you what it looks like when we first start creating a flow. The first thing we have to do is identify, we have to choose what's going to be the trigger for that flow. And so we have a number of connectors that are part of the Claris app category. And then we have a number of utilities, like the HTTP utility to receive or make HTTP calls. We have this cryptography utility, etc. So if I were to just select for a moment the Claris Studio connector, we have a number of triggers, like I mentioned before. So when a new record is created, deleted, updated, a user is updated, we can use these events to begin our flows. All right, now that we covered sort of that basic concept, let me show you, this is a simplified version of the flow that ran when we first created that activity record in Studio, and it was pushed to FileMaker with a status of draft. These were the steps that were executed. So I'm using the new record created trigger in the activity table in Studio. This is how I'm generating a UUID. I'm calling a Connect utility, which is generating a UUID, and then I'm actually going back to that record that was created, and I update that record, and I set the UUID field that I created in that table to that UUID value. Once I have that UUID, I use the FileMaker server on-prem connector to effectively push it to FileMaker. Yes, I want to go back to my slides. So if your FileMaker server is publicly available, say it's hosted with a hosting provider, then Studio can communicate to FileMaker server directly. If your FileMaker server is behind a firewall, then if it cannot reach if Studio can't reach FileMaker server over port 443, then you'll need to install the Connect on-prem agent, either on your FileMaker server or another machine. You get the installer from the Connect admin console. It's a straightforward installation. It's supported in Mac and Windows. In Windows, it runs as a service. That is what we're doing for UIC because their FileMaker servers are hosted on-prem. There is one limitation of the agent that I want to call out, and that is that if you're using the agent in order to update data in FileMaker, you have to use the FileMaker server on-prem connector. That connector uses primarily the data API. And so, as opposed to the old data API, where with the newer connectors or actions, we can reference, we can choose what field we want to use as the ID, say like to find a record or to update a record. With the newer ones, we can choose to use our own ID field. With the on-prem server connector, which uses a data API, we have to use the FileMaker internal record ID. What that means, if you are using that connector, is that first you have to find the record in FileMaker so you can get, using the UUID, so that you can get the internal record ID to then use to, say, update the record. Okay? That's only applicable if you're using the on-prem agent or if for some other reason you decided to use that specific Connect connector. Okay, so that was pushing data from Studio to FileMaker. Let's look at the flow of data the other way. Our options are the same, external data source or Connect. I find that Connect just, aside from any possible performance issues or maybe not supporting some data types or field types today, I find it more flexible. And it's using Connect is like integrating with any API. So that is the approach that I've taken here. So if we choose to use Connect to push data from FileMaker to Studio, we have two options. One is to use the trigger by script trigger, or we can create our own custom webhooks in Connect. So let's take a look at each one of these in turn now. If we use the trigger by script option, then that's what we choose as the trigger for a flow. And then in FileMaker, if we use the trigger Claris Connect flow script step, we can select from a drop-down the flow that uses the trigger by script trigger. One important consideration about this approach, or the flows that use the trigger by script trigger, is that they always return a response of OK. That's the HTTP response that you get. You cannot control that, okay? So there can be situations where that's what you want. It's like a fire and forget type approach. You call a script in FileMaker and you don't care what happens with it. More often than not, I want to know if there was an error or not, and I may need to retrieve some information to use in FileMaker. So that's, if that's what we need, then we need to go with the custom webhook approach. And in that case, we're going to use the insert from URL script step in FileMaker. So let me show you how that works. Back in 2023, some colleagues of mine and we published a series of blog posts on Connect and AWS services, custom connectors. One of the blog posts was specifically on creating webhooks and returning a custom response from Connect to be consumed in FileMaker. And in the interest of time, rather than me trying to demo that live, I'm actually going to reference that blog post. So in Connect, under a project, we can create webhooks. To create a webhook, all we have to do is give it a name, press create, and Connect will give us a URL that includes the name that we gave the webhook. Now, this is a URL that we can use to make HTTP calls to. In essence, it's like we're creating our own API endpoint for either FileMaker or something else to make a call to. We can choose whether the webhook requires authentication or not, and this is a setting that we have to enable if we want to return a custom response from the webhook. So the way we use that webhook then is when we create a flow, remember that when we create a flow, we always need to choose what the trigger is going to be. So the trigger in this case is going to be an incoming HTTP request. Okay? So when we make, whether from FileMaker or from something else, we make an HTTP call to the webhook, this flow is going to execute. And this is a screenshot of how we always link a webhook to a given incoming HTTP request step. I'm just going to scroll down here and show you that at the end of the flow, we can use this reply with JSON data step, which is part of the HTTP utility in Connect. This allows us to create our own custom response and specify a status code. And that's what I'm doing here. In this case, we're returning a JSON object that includes a message ID. And we chose, in this case, to use a status code of 201. So then in FileMaker, after calling that webhook, which triggered the flow in Connect, we can parse that information and utilize it as we need to. Did that make sense? All right. I'm going to go back to the slides. All right, so we covered pushing data from Studio to FileMaker and vice versa. What I want to cover next is error logging and trapping. So lots of errors can occur because we are doing an integration here, right? So when we try to update a record in FileMaker from Connect, that record might be logged by a user. If a developer, someone renamed a field in FileMaker, and we're using the FileMaker server on-prem connector, it's going to break a flow. If there is any validation error, for different reasons, different errors can occur, right? And if you want our applications to behave the way we expect them to behave and be robust and fail gracefully if there are any errors, we need to have error trapping and handling in our solutions. So let me show you what we have done in this respect. So going back to Connect, I have, let me go into webhooks. Here are my webhooks for updating, interacting with the different entities, like activity. I have a dedicated webhook for logging events. Typically, I use it for logging errors. And then I have a flow that I call logger that uses that incoming HTTP request as a trigger. And what this flow does is whatever is sent to it in the form of a payload in the HTTP request, it just creates a record in a table in Studio that is specifically for logging events, errors in particular. And whatever was passed to it is going to be stored in the payload field in the Studio table. And then it also sends an email notification. So if we look at the, actually, let me select this one. This is the flow that runs when we change the status in FileMaker and we want to push that status change to Studio. So you can see that I have a lot of error trapping here now. And every time, after every on error step, I'm calling that logger. So whether it's after, if I couldn't find, if there was an error returned by Studio, that we couldn't find the error, or if it found 0 or more than 1 records, I'm calling that webhook, the event log webhook. And I'm passing to it a JSON structure that has information that will help me later determine what the problem was, what the error was. In this case, I'm passing this hint that failed to find a single activity record using the UUID that was passed from FileMaker. And I have that in all of my flows. So whenever there is an error, I'm calling the logger.
Each logger call has a different JSON object.
Right, exactly, yeah. Just in case people in the back didn't hear, every call to that logger flow will have a different JSON payload that represents the specific error that occurred. This is a practice that works well for me. I like, so if you're not doing something like this, you might consider adopting something like this. Before, when I talked about pushing data from FileMaker to Studio, my intention was actually to show you this flow. Let's take a moment now to actually explore it a little more. So FileMaker is making that HTTP call to this webhook. It's using a patch HTTP verb, that's the expectation, and I'm passing the ID of the activity, the UUID, as a URL argument. Using Connect utilities, I'm creating variables to capture the verb and the ID. And then I'm saying if the verb was patch, I'm going to try to find that activity record in Studio. If there is an error, I call the logger, and then I exit with a custom JSON data. I also check, I don't just rely on Studio errors. We can check for things like, did we find 0 or more than 1 records, right? And so in this case, for instance, I'm exiting with this hint, failed to find a single activity record, and the HTTP status is 404, not found. And then if everything works, if I did find the record, I'll update it, okay? All right, that was error trapping and handling on the Connect side. Let me show you what we're doing on the FileMaker side. On the FileMaker side, to update the status of an activity in Studio, we have this script, which I renamed just so I can easily refer to it now in the demo. So these are our color scripts, script 1. It's structured using the single pass loop construct that some of you may be familiar with. And as you can see here in the pseudo catch block of the single pass loop construct, I'm also calling a logger script. So this is a standard practice for me in the applications that I build. I have a logger script in FileMaker that I can pass to it, really whatever information, but typically it's a JSON payload that represents some kind of error. Because I want to capture each and every error that occurs in the application. Now, notice that this color script, actually, before I go there, in addition to using the single pass loop construct, notice these error custom functions. These are part of a suite of custom functions for doing error trapping. It's a technique that we call clue. And I'm going to show you, give you just a taste of what that is like, because I feel that this clue technique is particularly well suited when we do any kind of integration with an API or Connect in this case. To demonstrate that technique, notice that the color script calls a subscript, script 2. Let's assume that an error occurred in script 2, okay, in the subscript. By using this clue technique, one of the benefits that it provides is that it captures, in the form of a JSON structure, the script stack. It captures all of the scripts that were running when the error occurred, okay? So in this error trace array, we have 2 elements. The first element corresponds to our color script, okay? And that technique captured for us automatically what parameters were passed into that script when the script was called. It also captures state information for when the script run. And the error, in this case, is a generic one, is that an unexpected error occurred when we call the subscript. So let's look at the second element, which represents that subscript. Here again, we're capturing the parameters that the caller script passed into the subscript. It captures state information for specifically when that subscript run. And when we look at this error section, we see this is actually that 404 not found that I showed you before. This is a custom error response that we got from our Connect flow. And here's our hint, failed to find a single activity record. I think this can be this representation of the scripts that we're executing when an error occurred can be a very powerful troubleshooting tool, both during development, but also in production. Almost always, I would say, I don't have to manually recreate the error and maybe step through the script debugger to see what actually happened. I have the information at my fingertips in this JSON structure because it captures the parameters passed, what was returned, and also state information. And the state information is whatever you want it to be as a developer.
Are they available, those error.pfs?
Well, thank you for that question.
Well, you just thought I'd ask.
How opportune.
Multiple price.
What's the going rate?
Yes.
We've made this technique available as open source. It's available on GitHub for you to download and explore. And if you want to learn more about it in a more guided form, you can check out that recording of the presentation I gave on it at Engage U last year. Okay, I'm about done. I brought up this diagram again, just sort of to have as a backdrop for a couple of final thoughts that I want to share with you. When we're using Studio and FileMaker, like I mentioned before, we are doing an actual integration. It's not like with WebDirect where you have one database, you know. Studio has its database, FileMaker is its own database, and we're integrating the two. So the considerations that apply when we're doing an integration, say between FileMaker and an API vendor or another system, they largely apply when we're using Studio. So one of those considerations is to be clear on, and this goes back to the question that someone asked about keeping, you know, do you allow users to modify records in both systems? Do you control that somehow? That is critical, right? To be clear on which of the systems is going to be the system of record or own different entity records at a given point in time. So for example, if you look at under the FileMaker tables this time, we have the activity entity there, and then below and to the right, learning objectives. And notice that that shape, that rectangle, has two vertical lines. That's to indicate that learning objectives in the FileMaker table is read-only, meaning the system of record for learning objectives is Studio. Learning objectives get created in Studio, and then they get pushed to FileMaker, but for reference purposes, let's say, they don't get modified in FileMaker. Okay? So an artifact like this diagram, a combined ERD diagram, and using this kind of nomenclature with the vertical lines, that can be a useful way of helping you visually capture what is the system of record for what entities. We actually want to try to avoid being in a situation where records for the same entity could be modified in either system. That's hard to implement, and it's actually not what most business rules call for, typically. So as in-house developers or consultants, I think one of our roles is to work with our clients to help them clearly define the business rules and for in what system a given record can be edited. And I guess an example of that was what we showed where whereas an activity proposal gets created in Studio, once it is pushed to FileMaker and the status is changed to propose, it can no longer be modified in Studio unless, in the case of the UIC app, the CE coordinator explicitly changes the status and makes it editable again in Studio. That covers the material that I wanted to cover. We can, happy to take some questions.
Yes, you were going to talk briefly about relationship.
Yeah. So,
if briefly as possible.
Let me. So we're going to use a spreadsheet view. This is another type of spreadsheet, another type of view that we have. And this is how we can look at the data in Studio tables. Let me do this. Let me just start creating a field of type related data. So one of the field types that we can create is related data. The way it works is this. Let me actually choose the faculty table. So this field would be a field that I would use to link activity and faculty. Excuse me. And so there is no concept of creating relationships, not with those terms in Studio. This is what Studio offers currently. We can choose to allow relating to one or multiple records. So this is how we would specify one-to-many or a joint relationship, okay? I'm going to cancel out of this. I'm actually going to show you the field, the related data field that I already have in the activity table. So for joint tables, like that activity faculty table, the table exists in Studio, but it's not currently exposed to us. What we see in these cases is in the ID faculty, this is a foreign key, if you will, on the activity table for faculty. These are the three faculty table internal record IDs that are currently linked to this activity record. So that's how that's how related data works in Studio now. Now, let me contrast that with if I go to the approval table, which is a joint table. Is that just taken? That's just probably taking a while. I am, or maybe not, maybe I didn't select it. Oh, I guess I didn't. These foreign key fields here, I am setting them. But this is a combination of, let me actually show you since we have time. I am in developer mode now in the Studio view. This is one of those spreadsheet objects that I mentioned before. It's the one that we use to select faculty. Let me actually show, this will be more relevant to show you in the learning objectives object. We can specify when a new record is created, we can specify defaults for certain fields. And so I am leveraging, I'm utilizing that functionality to say, when I create a new related record, set the UUID field in that table, in the related data table, to the UUID of the activity. And for that, I'm using this expression that faculty subview is the name of the subview in the view. Spreadsheet activities is the name that I gave to the spreadsheet object. And then this is Studio native expression syntax. I'm getting for the selected row, then from the data, the UUID field.
You inspect that origin, is that just basically JSON that you can look at somewhere, or is that to decipher what that syntax is that just something you just have to learn, or?
There is some documentation available from Claris on what that syntax is. I think it's limited. I think for now, if you start typing, you get the options. But it's trial and error, and if you can, like in my case, we work closely with Claris on this. I learned a bunch just from seeing the kind of expressions that they were using. I don't know if do you have any follow-up questions?
So a lot of times, a join table, you need your own data elements in there. You're saying that doesn't work in this case?
If you want to use that related data field, sort of like the built-in functionality in Studio, that is an important limitation now, because as you're saying, if we take as an example that activity faculty join table, I would like to be able to add my own attributes to it. Role, for instance, so I can choose what role a given faculty is going to play on a given activity. Are they going to be an instructor, the director, the coordinator? We don't have that option right now. Yes?
Is there a more effective way than, obviously you're interacting with a web interface for developing these interfaces. Is there a faster way to do this other than dragging, and it's all mouse-based? Are there other tools that can streamline Studio development?
What we saw in the keynote about using AI.
Well, that's the other extreme. But is there anything in between, like sort of automation or using keyboards and so forth?
Nothing that is built into the Studio application that I'm aware of. I don't know if I remember using tools to do automation in FileMaker that was just based on the UI. I don't know if there is anything that would work on Studio. Yes?
You were mentioning fields that are filled out in Studio that are pushed to FileMaker are technically read-only in FileMaker. Is it up to the developer to make sure that can't be edited, or is there like a flag similar to like a calculated field you can never type in, it won't let you actually write in there?
So let me see if I understood. Are you saying we do have fields in FileMaker that we want to treat as being read-only?
That are pushed, so the data, so if you have a field in Studio that is then pushed through a trigger to the FileMaker, through those graphs that you were showing, the web.
And you would?
You had the entry over on the right for Studio, and then the read-only on the left. The fields that were flagged as read-only. So is that, it's just going to error if you try to edit it in FileMaker side, or does it flag it in FileMaker saying, that this read-only?
If the way you're specifying that the field is read-only in FileMaker is by choosing that prevent, what is it? I always forget the exact wording. Prevent prevent modification during data entry, I think it is. If you choose that option on a FileMaker field and you're using the FileMaker server on-prem connector, this is something that I run into. Because it uses the API and you need to reference the fields that you want to modify on a layout, if you have that option enabled, it's going to fail. That wouldn't be the case if you're using a connector that uses OData. But I don't think I'm addressing your question. If a field,
I think it was at the table level, actually. It was a table. I think you were talking about the subjects that were not editable in FileMaker. I think it was the whole table, right? That was.
Well, that's just your schema. I think that was just your intention, just to say, well, but it's not a technical limitation.
the idea then is in FileMaker, the fields that should be read-only in FileMaker because they are created, edited in Studio, we would expose them on layouts, but they wouldn't be enterable in browse mode. There wouldn't be a way for the user to edit.
It's up to the developer to make sure it's not editable, or it's automatically not editable.
I think now I'm finally understanding your question. Yes, it's entirely up to you to ensure that they are read-only in FileMaker.
So it's more of a best practice thing. Like,
Exactly.
we just have to remember, don't allow
Yes.
editing
Yeah.
on that. Okay.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're actually a minute over. I don't know if the next presenter is here, but are there any other questions? Okay, thank you.